Hi, my name is Riley Dillon, and I'm going to be talking about a first-person shooter C++ systems demo that I've been working on. In this project, I created enemy AIs which track the player and will hunt them down and attack. I included a shooting system for the player, as well as an ammo and reload system. The first step was to create an enemy for the player to fight and have a threat. I created this enemy by applying a skeletal asset mesh as well as animation sequences. With animations, the enemy is more lifelike and animated, and I also use some blend spaces and blender sequences to create movement so that the enemy just does not slide around when the player is playing. Once I set up animations, I needed the enemy to move around to use those animations. To do this, I made it so that the enemy will randomly pick a location within a radius around it and move to that location. And every few seconds or so, it will move to a new random location. The next step was perception. How do I get this enemy to notice the player? So I added a perception sense which detects the player at a specific range within a cone of vision. The green ring you see shows how far the enemy can see from itself. The yellow indicates that the player has been identified and is ready to track it. The pink range is how far the player can be from the robot after detection before it can lose track of the player. Once the AI was able to move around and move towards the enemy when it detects the player, the next step was to make it so that the enemy would be able to attack the player when the player was in range. To do that, I made a sphere mesh that, when overlapped, will make it so that the enemy plays its attack sequence. I also added two hitboxes, one to each of the robot's hands, so that when it's punching, the hitbox will collide with the player and deal damage. However, the hitboxes are only active during the punch sequence. As you can see here, while it's doing the punch sequence, there is a small window in which the hitboxes will be set to be active and be able to deal damage. To run the attacks, it will randomly choose one of the two punch sequences that are available, and then it will run that animation sequence. During this animation sequence, it will activate the fist that is involved in the punch sequence. And if the fist box overlaps with the player, it will damage the player. While designing this enemy, I learned about the golden triangle of enemy design. The golden triangle rule states that an enemy can only be two of three things. It can either be strong, fast, and tough. Those are its three main stats, and it can only be two out of those three. A gorilla type fast attacking enemy can be strong and fast, but it cannot have a lot of health. Reason for that being that if an enemy is all three things, it becomes unbalanced. And the only scenarios in which you should have an enemy that has all three stats is when it can be avoided. After the enemy was designed and set up, I needed to have a player character that worked. So I first started with thinking what I wanted to use for the player character and the weapon. Originally, when I was collaborating with my friend on getting the model, I wanted to use a shotgun. However, at discussing timelines and due dates, we realized that a shotgun model would not have been feasible for him to create for me. So instead, we scaled it down and went for a Glock pistol. To get the gun to work, I used line trace systems to implement hit scan logic and as well as included an ammo and reloading system. To make the pistol work, I made a weapon class which handles all the hit scan logic and all the functions are called from it in the player character. To get the player character to fire the weapon, I added an enhanced input system that registers when the player clicks the left click mouse button, and then it will call the perform hit scan fire method, which is in the weapon class. Inside the weapon class, it gets the player's camera location and the camera rotation, and then creates a vector going from that camera location forward. And if that line trace hits something, it will check to see if it is something that can be hit. If it does, then it will try to apply damage to that. I also added in a sound effect for when the player is firing the weapon so that it feels more. I also included an animation sequence where it has the arms moving around as the player moves through the level to create more, as I said before, lifelike controls and interactions.